All right, so here we are, Tucker Carlson, part four of his series, the 9/11 Files, and a lot to do with certain anomalies relating to the events of September 11, 2001, including the collapse of World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. Something I don't really talk about because I'm not very experienced in engineering. And because I'm not really learned about this certain area, I tended to shy away about how the towers collapsed because who cares about my opinion, right? We have so many fucking people who are unqualified in certain areas of 9/11 giving their opinions and stating it as fucking fact. I'm not going to do that. The whole basis of my channel is to share information and to empower the viewer with information knowledge because knowledge is fucking power. And with the little bit of knowledge I have about the subject, I dare not expand into, oh, I know everything about 9/11. I don't. So, um, all right, let's go and play part four and see what is going on here. By the way, I didn't share the sound.
And when you captured and killed the perpetrator, you'd show no photos or video evidence of the raid that killed him, and then you'd dump his body into the middle of the ocean. Then you'd use the attack to justify the invasion of a completely unrelated country on behalf of a foreign power. In other words, you do exactly what the US government did in the wake of 9/11. It's possible that there are people who wanted conspiracy theories to thrive. The more far out, the better. The more time people spend wondering about directed energy weapons, the less time they focus on the obvious, the fact.
Holy fucking shit, I have to stop right there because I'm proud. I'm proud that he's actually saying this because you people in the truth movement who believe in directed energy weapons of Dr. Judy Wood and people like Christopher Bowen and Rebecca Roth, who wears wigs and doesn't even go by her real name, Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and all these other dumb organizations, Citizens Investigation Team and Boost Change and all these people, they fed you a whole load of bullshit and didn't talk about the real conspiracies involved with 9/11. Now, Tucker Carlson isn't really revealing anything that we didn't know for 22 years, but because of the stupid outlandish conspiracy theories, you didn't know much about the shit that he's talking about, which was fucking public. Now, he really didn't get into a lot of the more deeper conspiracies, Ali Al-Jar, everybody, or the additional hijackers and hijacking planes, and talked about the wider foreign policy network that relates to the current paradigm that we're seeing in the Middle East today, because it's all interconnected, going all the way back even to Abu Nidal, to the 93 bombing, to the Khobar Towers, to the Israeli Saudi nexus, and how they influence our American politics, and how the attacks, such as 93 and 9/11, all have a direct correlation to what's going on at this very fucking moment. So props to Tucker Carlson for calling out the shams.
Hiding in plain sight. And the main fact that they are ignoring is our government's central role in facilitating those attacks. We established this in episode 1 of this series, and the extreme levels of incompetence that made it possible for bin Laden from Kandahar, Afghanistan, to pull off the most sophisticated terror attacks in history.
It's key to remember what he's saying, right? Everybody is like, they can't believe this man, this old man, can plan on 9/11, and he didn't. That came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but he approved of it. That he has money, wealth money, tens of millions of dollars, okay, and to manipulate the minds of young Muslim men who have been affected by propaganda and to create a reactionary plan that would incite the Americans the greatest superpower on earth, to react in a way that's predictable for them. They aren't going to defeat the United States. In fact, when bin Laden was at war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, he used propaganda to his effect. In fact, he used people like Abdullah Yusuf Azam, who was a well known emitter and a hafiz, someone who's memorized the Quran, and who's a phenomenal orator, and used his influence with the young Islamic Ummah, the Muslim community, to persuade them to fight against a superpower in the Soviet Union. And nobody gave him any credit. He said, oh, he ain't going to win. The Afghans are going to win that war. Well, with the Arabs' help, they did. And the Arabs were less than 5% of the fighting force. How the fuck did they pull that off? So if you think that this man and his ragtag bunch of Al Qaeda Mujahideen fighters can't defeat a superpower, just ask the Soviet Union. Were they not a superpower at the time? How the fuck did they lose to a ragtag bunch of Mujahideen fighters? As the former National Security Advisor under Jimmy Carter once said, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who cares what a bunch of ragtag Muslims think? Well, now those ragtag Muslims are now an international threat once again, this time even bigger, because it didn't take much to persuade young Islamic men of fighting age to fight against the same country that helped to suppress the Palestinians and slaughter them en masse, and then destroy their countries in the process in the last 20 years, namely Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. So Mujahideen fighters from Algeria and Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, West Bank, Gaza, to come and fight against the imperialists who destroyed your lives. Starting to make sense now, huh? And this is exactly what the United States government wants, as well as the Israeli government and the Saudi government. What they want is for the United States to continue the defense spending against an enemy that can always be used every 10 years, because we're always at war with the Middle East and we're always destroying their infrastructure, destroying their lives in the process. You're creating the enemy, ensuring that they join these groups because they have nothing else left. You create an enemy for fucking life until you kill them.
On the other hand, not all the wildest theories about 9/11 are crazy. Some of them raise legitimate questions about what happened. And in this episode, we'll go through those theories one by one and explain using primary source documents, interviews with CIA officials, contemporary news reports, exactly what we know about those theories. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed at 10:28 a.m. on the morning of 9/11, and when it did, burning debris fell and damaged several of the buildings around it, including a building called World Trade Center Building Number 7. It was a 47-story steel frame high-rise located about a football field's length away on the other side of Vesey Street. Interestingly, there was a building between the North Tower and Building 7. That building did not collapse. The collapse of Building 7 is completely unaddressed in the 9/11 Commission report. 577 pages, but no explanation as to why Building 7 fell. And that provoked very obvious questions. People have been talking about it for the last 24 years.
And if you watch some of these pieces...
True enough, right? And I must regret and admit that I'm lacking in this area completely. I'm not even a layman. Over the years, people have asked me, predictably and understandably, what is your opinion on World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7? Now, my understanding of 9/11 comes from pre-intelligence, the understanding of Islamic militancy, and also about your foreign policy, how it all relates, right? Past terrorist events and whatnot. And that took up many years of my time, because I don't just read material and believe it. I have to also bring it through the scientific method to see if what I'm reading is verifiable information, if it's true or not. If I read a book, I'm not just going to read a book without footnotes. And for those who are, readers of books, and you buy a lengthy book like The Terror Timeline by Paul Thompson, you got hundreds of pages on your hand and you got hundreds of references. I don't buy a book without references. I don't buy a book and have the author just, flail away and say things without referencing of what and the important points of what he says. I need to verify what he says. I'm all about connecting the dots and verifying information, whether it's true or not, without bias, without prejudice. All right. So this is the one area I'm not very good at. I don't know how the towers collapsed. Were there bombs in the basement? Was there a chemical used to help compromise the buildings? I don't know because I'm not learned in engineering. I'm not learned in explosive demolitions. When you look at these buildings, they look like what controlled demolitions look like, especially for World Trade Center 7, not so much for 1 and 2. That came down, that was a crush down, top to bottom. And a demolition, a classic demolition, starts at the bottom, not at the top. Could have World Trade Centers 1 and 2 have been compromised by, beam cutting? Sure. Were there bombs at the bottoms of the buildings to compromise the structural integrity of the building? Sure. I mean, we do have individuals that said that they heard explosions in the B3, B2, B3 levels. Now, were they from the kerosene that came down by the elevators when the planes hit? But they only go down to a certain area. I don't know. I couldn't tell you for certain. So instead of offering my opinion, which is baseless, I'd rather not just say anything about it. Now, in turn, I get people from the True Movement say, well, that's why I don't talk about the Pentagon Shanksville. I don't know what crashed there. That's a whole nother fucking level. We have witnesses that saw the fucking plane crash in both areas. But they would tell you, well, they could be compromised. They all could be agents. You have proof of that? No, right? These are all residents of the area. People who saw a large jumbo jet. You can't mistake that for anything. Oh, a drone airliner? Drones were never made that big back then. We also have plane debris belonging to Flight 77 and 93. We have the personal effects of people who were on the plane that were found on the crash site. If you're going to say that they were planted there, I need to see evidence in broad daylight, right? You're just going to throw around plane debris, broad daylight. Underneath, tons of rubble at the Pentagon? Yeah, sure. Why not just allow for the planes to crash where they are unimpeded by air defense? Hey, that's a conspiracy. In fact, NORAD lied about their timeline. Wow. Really? I didn't know that. Right. So, don't try and compare. All you heard was explosions. You didn't see detonations. Nobody saw that. And how would you see detonations anyway if the building is crumbling before you? You know what I mean? All right. So please play it fair.
You can actually see them turning to dust before they hit the ground.
A steel building doesn't fall into its own footprint because a plane hit another building a couple hundred yards away.
I did not see a plane. They said the plane hit the first building, the second building.
Now, to be fair, World Trade Centers 1 and 2 didn't fall in their own footprint. World Trade Center 7 did. But according to certain designers of the building, like Les Robinson, it was designed to collapse and not just, fall about. But again, what do I know?
The circumstances around Building 7's collapse and the near total absence of an explanation for why it collapsed provoked, in the end, a Senate investigation.
Start with Building 7. Again, I don't know that you can find structural engineers that would say that thing didn't come down in any other way than a controlled demolition.
Building 7 had a pretty amazing list of tenants. They included, ironically, the New York City Office of Emergency Management. That would be the agency responsible for responding to the 9/11 attacks. On the 9th and 10th floors of Building 7 were the New York...
Talk about that for a second, because that's true. Why is the Office of Emergency Management in World Trade Center 7 if World Trade Center basically was a target for terrorism for years, going all the way back to 1993? Well, guess what? We're going to play a clip from the 9/11 Commission. And by the way, to you truthers that say, people like Richard Gage who tell you not to watch or to read anything from the government because it's all compromised. I'm going to show you why he's stupid and why you should never listen to people like this ever, because you wouldn't know what you're missing. And that's the reason why I upload clips of 9/11 Commission, because you get to miss out on shit like this. Here is Tim Romer of the 9/11 Commission talking to, I forgot the guy's name, regarding about why the Office of Emergency Management was located in World Trade Center 7, even though the World Trade Center itself was always a target for terrorists. Here's what he had to say.
Was a decision made to locate the Office of Emergency Management at the World Trade Center Building 7, right in the nest of where the terrorists had struck in 1993. Why put it in one of the most likely places where people are going to come back and hit us again, and where it could be knocked out and not help us save lives? That's the first question.
First of all, I just want to make a quick comment. I think I speak for all of us that you're speaking to the choir. We lived through this. We know these families. We lost friends and colleagues. Nobody here feels as strongly about this other than the people behind us who lost their loved ones than we three do. On the issue of the location of OEM, I was not involved with that decision.
Did you agree with it?
You're going to have the opportunity.
Did you agree with it?
You're going to have the opportunity to ask the person who's most responsible for that questions about it tomorrow. I did not agree with it. I will tell you why I did not agree with it. I did not agree with it for the very reasons that you said. I did not agree with it simply because it was on the 23rd floor of a building. And do I look like a guy that wants to walk up 23 flights? And tell me that the elevator's going to work. Yeah, Murphy was an optimist. It'll work. It won't work the time I'm walking up 23 flights. OEM should be located in a hardened and secured location. I understand the reasoning for putting it there. To get it there quickly, it was the most technologically advanced center. When I became director, I will tell you, there was no better emergency operations center. None in the world. The military came there. Everybody came there. I have to give Jerry a lot of credit. That center was the most technologically advanced. It allowed us to deal with anything. The only problem is it had to be available to us when we really need it. And you really have to think beyond that simple location for that simple date. It's not simply 9/11. It's much further than that. It's every city in this country when they locate them in a common office building and don't think of what they're doing because, well, they just need a little office space. You need to make the commitment to understand this is a vital facility. It should be in a hardened and a secured facility that people can walk up if there's no power, that people can get to in the event of weather, that nothing should impede your ability to use it.
So there you go. That's the reason why it was in World Trade Center, even though he disagreed with, he disagreed with the location of World Trade Center. I didn't share the audio for that. I got to remember, I got to share the audio. But, you heard what he had to say there. So I got to remember next time to share the audio, though, because people can't. You're going to hear like he's talking in the background and whatnot. So, yeah. So there you go. That was Richard Shire and whatnot. And let's keep going.
Field office of the United States Secret Service. The equipment and records they kept there were destroyed that day when the building collapsed. The building's 25th floor was home to a secret CIA office. Its records were also destroyed. Across the 25th floor was a Department of Defense office. It's unclear exactly what it was doing there. Building 7 was one of just 3 buildings that collapsed that day. The collapse of the other 2, the Twin Towers, got extensive coverage in the 9/11 report, of course. But Building 7 was almost entirely ignored. It's worth remembering that even on the morning of the 9/11 attacks, there were very prominent people already doubting whether a plane could take down a steel frame building.
I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through this steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane, because you're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on a building. I mean, these buildings were rock solid.
One reason the 9/11
Not really. Now, look, there's something called kinetic energy. I'm not expecting Donald Trump to understand kinetic energy, right? And when you have a plane going 500 miles an hour, fully fueled for a trip from the East Coast to the West Coast, it's in essence a bomb. Now, plane is mostly aluminum, right? It has other properties as well, but mainly aluminum. And when you crash it at a high rate of speed, people in the tube would say, well, how could it go through the skeleton of the World Trade Center if a bird can put a dent in it? Again, this is a ridiculous fucking argument. When you have an explosive property like kerosene and you have 38,000 pounds of it, it's essentially a fucking bomb. And it's going to actually puncture right through just that sliver of steel that makes up for the skeleton part of the World Trade Center, and the rest is just concrete, open air concrete, and open air where fire can expand. And when you're all the way up in the air and you're going through that much speed with a lot, adds right to the fuel. Again, I'm a layman in this area, but yeah. And I'm not the only one who, opines about what they talked about, why the building collapsed itself. And again, I'm going back to the 9/11 Commission report. And this is the reason why I tell you to watch it, because the explanation isn't even really given, even in the 9/11 Commission report. Listen to what they have to say about the, how World Trade Center 7 collapsed. And it's like incomplete. And dude, that's the reason why I get so fucking mad when I hear 9/11 truthers, alleged truthers, self-professed truthers that say, I'm not going to believe anything in the 9/11 Commission reports. It's all a lie. Then you ain't going to catch their own civil engineering experts say this.
Mr. Baker, you said this was the greatest structural collapse in the history of the world, and Mr. Holden, that makes your cleanup the biggest cleanup that has been done based on this structural collapse. Mr. Baker, I understand there were some conclusions to the civil engineers report. Could you talk to a little bit about that, about some of the weaknesses that you found in the structure of the World Trade Center?
Well, this initial report was really more of a question of a reconnaissance report than it was trying to find findings. It was a very, very complicated site with a lot happening. We were trying to get this document released, the World Trade Center Performance Study, which is a FEMA document available to you. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to pull the information together that was available and somewhat package it so that it would be available for future researchers and try to prioritize. And that was mainly the emphasis. We put together a few likely scenarios for some of the collapses, but we made no conclusions as to what they were. A lot of our questions, certainly there were a lot of discussions about the nature of the collapses of the Twin Towers. As a structural engineer, I have to say that most structural engineers were surprised at the collapse after it had survived the airplane impact. But in retrospect, maybe we should have known better. But one of the things that surprised us quite a bit was the collapse of Building 7, which was it didn't get a lot of press, but it was a 47-story building, 2 million square feet, a big building. And it was the first building that had ever collapsed, ever. That had been a fireproof steel building that collapsed in an uncontrolled fire.
Doesn't sound like the aficionado to me.
So that building, it was not hit by an airplane, so the collapse of that building is a very important one, and that's one that's, the study's ongoing, and NIST is studying it. There were 2 likely scenarios presented. One was diesel fuel. There's a lot of emergency generators in that building. Some people give that credibility. We don't know. The other was perhaps just a simple paper storage fire. It turns out one of the best sources of fuel there is paper, okay? And it could have just been something as simple as a file room that burned for 7 hours. But those are the things. It really wasn't a question of nailing the thing. I think it's probably take a couple of years before we really know why some of these buildings actually collapsed.
From the audience, I heard a phrase, what about fireproofing? I guess it was based on code, right?
Well, yeah, there's issues, questions about the fireproofing and the buildings. Building 7, I'm not sure, aware of any issues, and that's certainly part of the NIST study. There were some questions about the fireproofing in the towers. There had been efforts to increase the thickness of some of the fireproofing in the towers, and whether or not why that was done, and it was not complete at the time of the impact. The Tower 2, which is the second one hit, the first one collapsed, was hit in a zone where the fireproofing had not been upgraded. The question there, it's an unknown thing if that was really significant or not. It's quite likely that that particular structure would not have survived regardless, because there's a kind of a theory that's kind of post this report is that even though the fires that were burning there weren't in the sense of building fires all that large, there was a lot of fireproofing that was knocked off. Okay, so there was a lot of exposed steel.
What was that? A lot of what now?
A lot of fireproofing that was knocked off, but by the impact of the airplane. You know, when you think about this, these airplanes were going extremely fast. They were going cruising speeds at down that low. It was, I think, close to around 550, 600 miles an hour, if I remember correctly, going very, very quickly. So there's a lot of debris ripping off a lot of fireproofing, and then the ensuing fire.
Well, I wasn't upgraded. Could be, right? Could have been an answer. I don't know, right? But that's a workable theory. But as you could see there, even they are unconvinced about certain theories that could have led to the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or 1 and 2. And that's why I implore everybody to watch, these investigative videos, because it certifies certain people's beliefs about how World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 collapsed. Did it collapse from, implanted bombs or by other incendiary devices which compromised the structural stability of the building? Yeah, sure, could be. These people are basically up in the air, and that's the Civil Aviation of Engineers. Civil Society of Engineers, right there, William Baker. So there you have it.
The commission may have effectively ignored the collapse of Tower 7 is because even now we don't really know much about it. On the morning of September 11th, Lower Manhattan was cut off from the public with military-style checkpoints. World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed that afternoon at 5:20 p.m. Video that has been widely circulated appears to show it falling symmetrically into its own footprint. Several buildings closer to the Twin Towers, meanwhile, remain standing. That's odd. And then the debris was removed.
No, it isn't actually. When you look at this, like World Trade Center 5 and 6, they're not nearly as tall. So there's like 5 stories, 6 stories tall. So they have a stronger base, right? And also they didn't share the same amount of damage as 7 did. Some of them were just completely destroyed. World Trade Center 6, I think, had a hole that left, the east and west Parker sides of the building standing. World Trade Center 7 had multiple areas of crater damage at the lower levels, including the back of the World Trade Center 7. There's hardly any videos of this, but it was multiple fires going on in the building. I have testimony from fire chiefs at the Aegis versus Con Ed civil suit case. Now, a lot of people say, what the hell is that? It was a civil case that talked about, let me just talk about it for a bit. It was basically a civil case where when the North Tower, in other words, let me give you a little bit of the synopsis of it. When the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed, its debris and the resulting fires from that building caused World Trade Center 7 to collapse. And the collapse of World Trade Center 7 destroyed what at the bottom was an electrical substation belonging to Con Ed. It was located underneath the building. And acting as subrogars of Con Ed, agents, along with other insurance companies. In 2006, filed a negligent lawsuit against the entities responsible for World Trade Center 7, and one of them was Silverstein Properties. They owned World Trade Center 7. This is the only building that they owned. The others they rented from Port Authority. Now, the plaintiffs claimed that the negligent design and construction had compromised the building's structural integrity, causing it to collapse from the ensuing fires. But the district court, the Southern District of New York, initially dismissed the claims, ruling that the September 11 attacks were not a foreseeable event. And testifying on behalf of agents were a number of fire chiefs that said that they saw a large amount of fires that they have never seen before. And one of them was like Chief Daniel Negro. And, just to, show you the testimony itself, this is part of that testimony. And you could see it right here. There was a question. What can you recall about the fires that you saw on the north side of World Trade Center 7 at the time? Objection, says the lawyer. Dismissed. Answer, please, Mr. Negro. At the time, I didn't know. At various times of the day, I would say there was more fire in that building than I've seen in my career in high-rise buildings, other than, of course, World Trade Centers 1 and 2. But certainly, there were considerable fires in various locations, which were unusual to have. Okay? This is Daniel Negro again. I think we in the fire department, we in the staff chiefs, which are the highest ranking members of the department, the ones that surviving members that were there, I think I was able to bring them all into a meeting with Chief Carruthers, Mike Butler, and Harry Myers. They were all chiefs who weren't at the scene at the initial collapse, but made their way there afterwards. Myself, Chief Turi, our chief of safety, and Frank Fellini might have attended. I didn't know, but if he left the operations that year, right? So here you have, this is Negro's testimony, right? I have a number, as you can see, there's a number of things here. Look, Frank Carruthers. I was talking about what was obvious the impact to the front of the building that I observed. Can you be more specific? What did you see is fine. Go ahead. A building that looked like it had been bombarded with large, heavy debris, large, heavy objects. That's what he saw. Okay. So I'm not going to sit here and just make shit up. I'm going to show you direct, testimony of the fire chiefs who were inside World Trade Center. There was a number of fires going on in the building. That's all I wanted to say about that. So there you have it. I mean, World Trade Center was engulfed in fire, even though it didn't show, but there was fire inside internal parts of the building.
And shipped to Asia. That's even stranger.
Where is all the rubble gone? And have you been able to, is there any way you can answer that question?
I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't get the question.
Okay, I apologize. Jackie Judd and several other people keep asking us, when you look at where the towers used to stand, there is surprisingly so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
It's a very good question, Peter, and I have asked some people who've been doing some of the rescue and recovery work this morning. If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was pulverized, evaporated. Now, I should say, though, for the last several hours, there's been a steady stream of dump trucks and other very large vehicles carrying out debris.
Let me explain to you simple physics. The majority of World Trade Center 1 and 2 were concrete, for the exception of the steel beams inside the core of the building and the exoskeleton, which was one yard of steel. And on the outside is the cladding. That's aluminum, right? So when you have 110 stories collapsing on another, the weight of the building is going to pulverize, and it keeps getting more weight and more weight and more weight. So floor 110, goes to floor 100, goes to floor 90. And what do you think is floor 90 is going to look like when 20 stories are crashing on top of it? The concrete's going to pulverize. And what's left? The twisted steel that we saw 7 fucking stories high in certain areas. That's why you didn't see 110 stories of steel and other materials, because the other material was concrete, which was pulverized. Now, did I say that there was no evidence of any explosions going on in certain floors? I never said that. I don't know if there were. We probably will never know if there were. But again, I'm not learned in this area.
According to a New York Times article published 5 months after the attacks, quote, an unknown number of steel columns has been sent off to mills as far away as Asia without ever having been examined or saved. This made it nearly impossible for engineers to answer the monumental questions of exactly why and how the buildings, designed to sustain a jet impact, completely collapsed. To the extent that any analysis of the debris was done at all, it was done by volunteers at a scrapyard in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Okay, that's not necessarily fucking true. In fact, Federal Emergency Management were there, the FBI was there, Civil Society of Engineers was there, all right? And, I do want to talk about this because this is important. Now, what was the response to the cleanup, right? What was the response to the collapses? Well, let's talk to the former mayor of New York, right? Michael Bloomberg, because he testified about the quick response of the cleanup, which was to help in the search and rescue of the operations of the World Trade Center. It wasn't just all of it was shipped to China. A lot of it was sent to Fresh Kills. And I'm going to share this video for you and listen to what he has to say.
After the towers collapsed, the city's response was just as exemplary. Department of Sanitation officials at the recently closed Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, knowing they had heavy lifting and hauling equipment at hand, immediately made plans to send that equipment into Manhattan. Officials of the city's Department of Design and Construction, or DDC, acted with equal dispatch, obtaining equipment from some of the city's major construction firms. Despite the fact that its command center was destroyed in the attack, the city's Office of Emergency Management, OEM, established a temporary command post. By the evening of September 11th, lights lit up the entire site while the search for survivors went on. Firefighters worked day and night to extinguish fires that burned beneath the rubble for months. The Department of Design and Construction, along with the Fire Department and the Office of Emergency Management, spearheaded interagency coordination among city agencies and with federal and state agencies and private organizations. In the first 5 days alone, almost 3,000 truckloads of debris were removed. Over the next 7 months, an average of more than 7,000 tons of debris per day was taken from the site. Barging operations were established at Hudson River Piers 25 and 26 to transport debris from Manhattan to the Fresh Kills landfill, which was reopened to accommodate the enormous tonnage of material. The recovery proceeded in a manner that made the search for human remains the highest priority. Work came to a halt any time it appeared such a discovery might be made. To date, the remains of 1,481 victims of that attack have been identified by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, an office that has led the nation in its use of the state-of-the-art DNA identification technology. The clearing of the site, which was initially expected to take years, instead took 8 months. The work was not only accomplished much faster than expected, but done under budget without a single loss of life, with an injury rate far less than at an ordinary construction site, despite the unprecedented conditions in which the work was done.
So there you have it. I mean, that's where the steel basically went. Well, a lot of it went to Fresh Kills. So I don't get this this whole, all of it went to China, or a majority of it. No, it didn't actually. So you have to be careful about these things. This is the reason why I'm doing these. I'm not saying Tucker Carlson omitted this on purpose. I mean, she had a lot of shit to fucking cover. So I'm going to give him some leeway here. But yeah, that's basically it when it comes to why there was so much steel that was being shipped, and it took months to do this.
According to the New York Times, the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation involves extremely thin bits of steel collected from the trade towers and from 7 World Trade Center, a 47-story high-rise that also collapsed for unknown reasons. The steel apparently melted away, but no fire in any of the buildings was believed to be hot enough to melt steel outright. 2 agencies investigated the collapse. One was FEMA, which relied on volunteers, and the other was NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, funded by Congress. FEMA's explanation is that falling debris from the North Tower damaged the outer facade of Building 7 and started a series of fires in the lower floors. According to NIST, the collapse of the towers in the morning had damaged water mains, so the building's sprinkler systems failed. Since the building had been evacuated earlier in the morning and the fire department's resources were stretched to a breaking point by ongoing search and rescue missions, fire chiefs made the decision early on not to fight the fires that were burning in Building 7. According to the NIST report, thermal expansion of steel beams, not the complete melting of steel, caused the connections tying a crucial girder 2001A, to column 79, and that joint failed. The girder walked 6¼ inches off its seat, and that precipitated what is known as a progressive collapse. That means that the collapse started in one area and then spread downward due to gravity through the rest of the building. That's the explanation. There are 2 questions that come to mind, and both are obvious. First, if there was just one failure point, then why does video evidence show the building coming down symmetrically, all at once, at freefall acceleration, in what more closely resembles what's called a global collapse, where all the supporting columns are severed simultaneously? The second question is, how have other steel frame buildings around the world, similar in design to that in Tower 7, fared during fires? In 1991, for example, the 38-story One Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia had
It's not fair to compare. It just isn't. It doesn't have to be with 9/11 either. You can't compare certain events to other events that were similar, because none of these buildings were hit by debris from taller buildings. None of them suffered structural damages like World Trade Center 7 did. And again, I relate to the testimony of fire chiefs. I'm going to show you some more where they said that, they set up a collapse perimeter, because that, Tucker Carlson talks about that.
an 8-floor fire that burned for 18 hours, and yet the building didn't collapse. In 1988, the 62-story First Interstate Bank building in Los Angeles had a massive fire that started on the 12th floor. There was no structural failure. In 2017, the 24-story Grenfell Tower in London burned for over 24 hours, and yet the internal steel withstood the fire. So why then did...
Yeah, but as you can see, a lot of it's concrete. Look, right there. It's concrete. World Trade Center 7 was not made of concrete.
Building 7 collapse after just 7 hours of burning in a way that no steel frame building anywhere...
And again, I'm not saying it wasn't compromised either. You'll never hear me say that.
...in the world has ever collapsed. With the support of a group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Professor Leroy Hulsey of the University of Alaska at Fairbanks...
It's also a bias study. Now, look, say what you want about FEMA. If you think that's biased, well, this is biased too, because guess who paid Leroy Hug for the study? Architects and Engineers. Of course he's going to say what they want him to say, right? So what you need to do is to get somebody who doesn't have any federal connections, get a group of scientists, engineers. They're not getting any funding grants from the federal government to basically, do an independent study, because this is nonsense what Hulsey reports, right? I don't know if he's right or wrong, because like I said, I'm not the expert here. Go to David Chandler or Wayne Costi, Tony Zambati. They're the engineers. I'm not. But I'm just saying, if you're just going to believe Hulsey, then you know better than the people that just believe what the Federal Emergency Management has to say, or NIST, right? Oh, NIST lied in their report. Well, if you're just going to agree with Hulsey says, well, then you know better. right? So the champions of architects, and by the way, the one time, chief executive officer of the architects and engineers was Richard Gage. Richard Gage doesn't know if the earth is round. He said that on Patrick Bet-David's show. Yeah, please. Nevertheless, screw him. You can't just say NIST is wrong and Halsey is right because it acquiesces to your beliefs about what you think 9/11 is.
Thanks, conducted an independent study whose findings were released in 2020. Professor Halsey found that office fires of the kind in Building 7 on 9/11 could not have produced sufficient thermal expansion to cause the crucial girder to fail. It's impossible, he found. And more significantly, he and his team found that NIST's explanation does not account for what anyone can see on video, which is that the entire building came down all at once, not in a progressive collapse, but in a total collapse. Something else, therefore, must have triggered the downfall. There is only one thing that could have triggered a collapse like the one we saw on television, and that is a controlled demolition.
Look, if you wanted my opinion, I happen to believe all three of the buildings were compromised. Now, World Trade Center 7 is really not important for me. World Trade Center 1 and 2, far more. I think those buildings were definitely compromised. But do I know it? No. I believe it. Same thing goes for 7. I think the beams were compromised. They were cut, which means that there was advanced knowledge that the terrorist attack was coming. So, by who? I don't know what to tell you. I don't know.
That was his conclusion. Our ability to analyze the collapse is limited by the video that we have. We don't have footage of the south side of the building where the fires were, because the cameras there were likely destroyed or obstructed by the collapse of the Twin Towers. One issue with the controlled demolition hypothesis is that the widely circulated video of the building coming down is selectively edited. In fact, the building did not exactly collapse all at once. It came down in 2 stages. What you're seeing now is the full video of the collapse. It shows the penthouse collapsing first, and then very quickly, the rest of the building going. The unedited video leaves more questions than it answers. It calls into question the official NIST narrative, but it doesn't conclusively show a controlled demolition either. Because of how quickly authorities shipped the rubble overseas, we did not get a thorough investigation into the destruction. But one group of scientists did collect and test 4 samples of dust and debris collected by a Manhattan resident about 10 minutes after the collapse of the Second World Trade Center tower, 2 the next day, and a 4th about a week later. In 2009, they published the results of their study in the Open Chemical Physics Journal. In those samples, the scientists found distinctive red-gray chips full of highly energetic and thermitic material. In other words, they found traces of explosive compounds. To its credit, NIST's report did investigate multiple hypothetical blast scenarios, but found it would be impossible to carry out on any floor in the building without detection, and would have required removing or cutting columns with welding torches and placing wires for demolition. NIST found that window breakage patterns on visible floors was not at all like expected from a blast. NIST did not test residue from the attacks for thermite, but did note that thermite burns slowly relative to explosive materials and would require several minutes in contact with a massive steel section to heat it to a temperature that would result in substantial weakening. Additionally, they estimated that at least 0.13 pounds of thermite would be required to heat each pound of steel section to approximately 700 degrees Celsius, the temperature at which steel weakens substantially. Which means that if Building 7 were demolished using thermite, many thousands of pounds of thermite would need to have been placed inconspicuously ahead of time, remotely ignited and somehow held in direct contact with the surface of hundreds of massive structural components to weaken the building, making it an unlikely substance for achieving a controlled demolition. NIST also says that an explosion big enough to take down the building would have been considerably louder than any noises recorded around the time the building collapsed. Yet, eyewitness accounts say they did hear explosions inside the building.
All this time, I'm hearing all type of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions.
We attempted to interview that witness.
Also, Barry Jennings, that's the guy's name. He passed away. He passed away from leukemia, according to his son. anyway, he changed the story afterwards. He did a second interview and he said that, there were no explosions. So, but I mean, he's not alone. We have, people, employees of the World Trade Center that heard explosions in World Trade Centers 1 and 2. Multiple people, multiple. Wasn't just a one-off. There were multiple people. So just to show you that, hey, there's a consistent finding here. Yeah, there is.
Yes, his name was Barry Jennings, but he died at the untimely age of 53 just 2 days before NIST released its report on Tower 7.
Right.
The film director Spike Lee attempted to cover this story in an HBO docuseries entitled NYC Epicenter's 9/11 to 2021 and a half. In an interview with the New York Times, Lee said the amount of heat that it takes to make steel melt, that temperature is not reached. And then the juxtaposition of the way the Building 7 fell to the ground, when you put it next to other building collapses that were demolitions, it's like you're looking at the same thing. For saying this, Lee was excoriated by the press, which usually lionizes him. He suggested that the official 9/11 narrative might be wrong, and for doing so, he was called an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist by the Times of Israel. In the end, Lee re-edited his docuseries and removed portions that were skeptical of the official story of the collapse of Building 7. Where do you keep your most valuable possessions?
He was also in talks with Richard Gage, of all people. I mean, dude, man, stay away from that fucking guy. You don't need him. End of story. He's not going to give you anything relating to 9/11, anything.
Lynch. Both banks had government is still hiding his name. On page 499, one easily missed footnote says there was a surge in put options, investments that profit when stock prices fall. These put options were put against United Airlines' parent company, and they were placed on September 6th and then against American Airlines on September 10th. Incredibly, the report goes on to note that 95% of the trade against United Airlines was made by a single U.S.-based institutional investor. So who was that investor? Well, we don't know. The U.S. government is still hiding his name. They refuse to tell us. Why? No one will say. The commission report says an investigation by the FBI found out the trades were, quote, innocuous, whatever that means. Researchers have since discovered that these trades are far from innocuous, with trading volumes showing statistical significance, massive statistical significance. There were other trades, too. On September 7th, the number of put options placed against British Airways was 4 times the normal volume. The number of put options against American Airlines on the day before the attack was 285 times the normal volume. In the days before the attacks, put options surged against Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch. Both banks had sizable offices in the World Trade Center. There were also notable surges in gold and oil call options in advance of the attacks. But who could have known the attacks were coming, apart from Al-Qaeda? One highly significant yet often overlooked aspect of the 9/11 attacks is that foreign intel agencies, including those of ostensible allies, likely had detailed prior knowledge of the event.
These 9/11 hijackers had come from Germany. Were the Germans asleep at the switch, or did they just not tell us anything about these people?
John Kiriakou was chief of counterintelligence on the bin Laden unit.
His name is John Kiriakou. Kiriakou. That's cute.
What about the Israelis? What about the Saudis? There is solid evidence that members of the Saudi royal family were working with Al-Qaeda terrorists.
The 9/11 Commission, not surprisingly, ignored this subject altogether. Here's what we know. As early as January of 2001, France's Foreign Intelligence Service learned that Al-Qaeda was planning a hijacking plot involving a U.S. airline. What did the French tell the United States and when? We don't know. But the French are not alone. Others knew.
Well, there's no doubt that the Israelis and probably the British had better information than the people
now we're talking.
Working against Osama bin Laden in the agency. Much better information.
Michael Scheuer ran the CIA's bin Laden unit in the late 1990s. One reason foreign governments may have had superior information is that the NSA frequently shared signals intelligence details with them, details it withheld from our own CIA. Signals intelligence is a type of espionage that deals with intercepting phone calls and radio communications.
We needed the collection of signals intelligence out of Afghanistan. And since there was no central telephone company or communications companies, it was very limited. You had to be lucky to find the signal. Well, we found a couple of signals, and we shared the information with NSA, and they collected information and wouldn't share it with us in the raw form. NSA reports are generally summaries of what people say over the phone. You don't really know always who's talking to who. The first thing we did when we got the first copies of translated material, we sent them to NSA and said, can you please provide the other half of this to us? And they said, thank you very much, but under the 1947 Act that created NSA, we don't have to share that with anyone, and we're not going to. But somehow...
This is a true story. Now, there was an argument between him, Michael Scheuer, and a person named Barbara McNamara, who was the deputy director of the NSA. And it was about the CIA who were bugging a house in Yemen owned by Ahmed al-Hada, who was an associate of Osama bin Laden from the days of the Afghan War in the Soviet Union. This house, which is called the Yemen Hub, was the central hub for al-Qaeda communications worldwide. Countries like Egypt and Syria and Jordan, who would bug the phones of known militants and their associates, because they need, there was no such thing as privacy laws, right, for these people. So basically had to direct their communications to the Yemen Hub through code. That code would be transcribed by whoever's getting the phone call in that house and then sent to the recipient elsewhere. It could have been Algeria, it could have been Saudi Arabia, it could be the United States, it could be anywhere. Great Britain, or London office for Al-Qaeda in London, right? Afghanistan, Sudan, wherever. And that's how it worked. And so Scheuer knew this, knew the NSA decrypted the phone as early as 1996, 5 years prior to 9/11. So he's asking Barbara McNamara, the deputy director of the NSA, hey, can we get the other half? Because they bugged the house. They could hear what was being said inside the house, but they couldn't hear what was being said on the phone. And she said, if you compromise our operation, we'll sue you and we'll win in court, blah, blah, blah. And Scheuer, who's not used to saying no, backed down because he really couldn't do shit. Meanwhile, these agencies are supposed to be working with one another. And they're not sharing with information with one another. I wonder if they're still doing that today.
The Israelis and the Saudis always were able to find out something was there that they wanted. And so when we refused, they'd call the White House would call the DCI, and the DCI would say, give it to them.
We know very little about NSA's foreknowledge of 9/11 because the 9/11 Commission barely investigated it. Keep in mind, the NSA is the largest American intel agency by far. And yet the Commission never assigned a staff member to research NSA files, in part because some of the 9/11 commissioners and staff simply did not understand what the NSA was and what it did. Even now, the NSA's terrorism archives still have never been thoroughly reviewed by outside investigators. If someone ever did go through those files...
For Tucker Carlson to talk about this is a fucking grand slam. The only people to ever talk about this were Paul Thompson, Kevin Fenton. Later on, Ray Nolashilsky and John Duffy. Ali Soufan in the Black Banners. Myself, DJ Thermal Detonator. That's it. Hardly anybody else. For this to be spoken by him, who's a major fucking figure, millions of people follow him, to bring this up, I'd rather late than never. Yeah, this shit should have been done 22 years ago. We would be well ahead of the fucking game. But late to the party now. But at least it arrived. Here it is. finally someone talking about the NSA in all this. James Bamford is the king of this. He talks about it in all his books. The Shadow Factory. Read that book. It's all about the NSA. And no one ever, people don't even know who he is, James Bamford. The best author on the NSA in the world, bar none. So I'm so glad he's talking about this. This is huge.
They'd likely find a treasure trove of previously undisclosed warnings about the 9/11 attacks. The NSA was the primary agency responsible for monitoring the switchboard through which al-Qaeda operatives communicated with each other.
It's certainly an absurdity for what the American people pay for signals intelligence to be collected, translated, and supplied to the intelligence community, to have the British, the Saudis, the Israelis getting information from our national security agency that we in the agency were not privileged enough to get.
A number of foreign governments may have had foreknowledge of 9/11, but the Israeli government stands out in particular. And here's why. On the morning of 9/11, a group of 5 Israeli nationals purported to have witnessed the initial explosion of the World Trade Center and were seen to be celebrating the event. At the time, the celebrations received quite a bit of mainstream media coverage.
Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
It's striking to see operatives from a supposedly allied country celebrating the mass murder of Americans. But it is true that some in Israel saw the attack as a good thing for them. A September 12, 2001 article in the New York Times quotes now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding to the 9/11 attacks. Quote, "It is very good," before adding, well, not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy. Netanyahu predicted that the attack would strengthen the bond between our two peoples because we've experienced terror over so many decades, but the United States has now experienced a massive hemorrhaging of terror. According to FBI documents, the Israelis caught celebrating the 9/11 attacks had videotaped the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and may have possessed foreknowledge of the same. When the Israelis were arrested in New Jersey, they were carrying box cutters, multiple passports, thousands of dollars in cash, and photos of themselves smiling with the World Trade Center burning in the background.
The Israelis are always for the Israelis first, last, always. They don't like the United States, except for the most part, our money. And yet, our national security agency is producing information for them, but not shareable with its own people. Go figure.
According to FBI records, polygraph tests administered by the FBI suggested that they did not have foreknowledge of the attacks, but did engage in deception and were likely involved in illegal foreign counterintelligence. They were spying.
Let me talk about this for a second, because I'm going to show you a bigger bomb than that, right? Now, when it comes to that's the FBI report of the Israelis who were, engaged in espionage, engaged in an operation that involved the spying of not just living next door to the hijackers, but also in the FBI, the DEA, Southwest Laboratories, right? These were the so-called art students, right? Now, in the FBI report, which I'm going to show you, there is basically a page which I want to share. I want to share with you here, right? This is the FBI report that he's showing you, dated September 14, 2001, Newark. This is the FBI. Read this with me. Details of this report, which is established basis linking 5 Israeli nationals to the 9/11 attacks. So this is what I have to say about details. On instant date, Newark initiated an investigation predicated upon the detention of the 5 Israeli nationals who may have possessed information about the terrorist incident targeting the Twin Towers in New York City's World Trade Centers on September 11, 2001. The following sets forth the basis for linking these 5 Israeli nationals, right? The 5 Israelis are Sivan and Paul Kurzberg, excuse me, Oded Elner, Omar Mamre, damn, I forgot the other guy's name. That's going to kill me. Yaron Shmo. That's the name of the 5 guys. By the way, there were more that he doesn't bring up. He probably doesn't know. And which leads to an even bigger fucking, maybe a bigger conspiracy involving Israel. Bigger than this shit. Way fucking bigger. But he doesn't know it. And those 2 guys are Modi Bupel and Roy Barak. And they were arrested near Shanksville. And they work for urban moving companies. Now, that's detailed in this report. But very few in the know, like DJ Thermal Detonator and myself, are working on a theory that connects to one of the hijackers, whose family has connections to Israeli intelligence for decades. How come Al Qaeda didn't pick this up? And that's related to Ziad Jarrah. Now, I don't have evidence for this. Still working on it. Even in, a couple of years now. But Ziad Jarrah's uncle, Ali al-Jarrah, was arrested in 2006 or 7 by Hezbollah in Lebanon and found out that he was a spy for Israel for 25 years. He has an uncle, he has a cousin, Asim al-Jarrah, who worked for Israeli and Libyan intelligence and German intelligence. Connections with the A&O. That's how far back this motherfucker goes. So there's a family of, oh, you didn't know this? That's because the 9/11 Truth Movement didn't you do any favors. Now, I'm not saying Ziad Jarrah was an Israeli asset, even though if you listen to the phone calls when the 9/11 Truth Movement says, oh, those phone calls, don't listen to them, they didn't exist, are going to miss an anomaly. On Flight 93, there were 6 phone calls, 2 from flight attendants, 4 from passengers, that stated that there were only 3 hijackers on board. But there was supposed to be 4. 4 of the 6 said all 3 of them were dark-skinned males. Ziad Jarrah is light-skinned. Ziad Jarrah also doesn't fit the profile of an Islamic terrorist. He comes from a Christian background. He's Muslim, but he has friends with Christians and Jews when he grew up. Grew up in Bekaa Valley, Lebanon. Didn't grow up in any religious training. Suddenly goes to Germany and he's a fundamentalist. Goes to the most fundamentalist mosque in all of Hamburg, Al-Quds. And gets situated with the Hamburg cell there. Twinky dink. But let's go back to the report. The following sets forth for the basis of linking 5 Israeli nationals. Oh, wait a minute. It's redacted. Here's the second page. Fucking redacted. Here's the third page. Halfway redacted. Furthermore, on September 11th, blank of the Pennsylvania State Police detained a yellow Penske box truck, which was at the request of Newark. They inspected the vehicle and determined that the vehicle's 2 occupants, I just named them, Modi Bupel and Roy Barak, had been identified as Israeli nationals. Were on their way to Columbus, Ohio, when Newark later questioned Urban Moving Systems, who they talked with for the first time, Dominic Suter, who later questioned Dominic Suter of Moving Systems about the vehicle's presence in Pennsylvania. He could not offer an explanation. What happened in Pennsylvania, Flight 93? Who was on Flight 93? Ziad Jarrah. Ziad Jarrah may have Israeli intelligence with family members in Israeli intelligence. See where I'm going with this? Did Christopher Bowling ever bring this up? Did Rich Gage ever bring this up? Because if you don't believe in hijackers, this doesn't exist. You see what I mean, motherfucker? Okay. So that's what you're missing. And that's why I'm here to tell you about it. All right? Again, may not turn out to be anything at all. But again, it might turn out to be a bigger conspiracy. That's why I do this stuff.
in the United States. The leader of the group, a man called Dominic Suter, fled to Israel on or around September 14th, 2001, immediately, and he was later included on an FBI anti-terror watch list distributed to European allies in May of 2002. Most of the Israelis were held in FBI detention for 2.5 months before they were deported for visa.
By the way, if you go to DJ Thermodetonator's channel, 9/11 True Crimes, he is the only person that I know of that uploaded the entire 2020 video about urban moving systems by John Miller. Go to his channel. One of the best 9/11 investigators in the fucking world, bar none, I've ever come across. He's the only person, and I think it's his most popular video because it's so rare. It's not uploaded anywhere. He's the only one that has it.
Violations, a common way to expel foreign intel assets from allied countries.
The Israelis pride themselves on having infiltrated every Arab intelligence service,
Did they have?
every terrorist group. Did the Israelis know about 9/11 and not tell us?
One memorandum submitted to the 9/11 Commission.
By the way, more props for Tucker Carlson for bringing up the Gerald Shea memorandum. I have an entire playlist dedicated to the reading of the chapters of this report. I'm the only person to ever have done so. It is by far the most important document detailing the Israeli nationals and the 9/11 hijackers, as well as spying on the United States. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, so bear with me.
Presented substantial evidence suggesting that numerous art students from Israel, who were in fact Israeli intel assets, have been strategically located across the United States. It's hard not to notice that they lived near the future 9/11 hijackers.
There were groups.
That is correct. Now, let me finagle my way here, because what I'm about to show you is going to blow your fucking mind. Gerald Shea, by the way, is a retired corporate writer from San Obispo, California, who took the arrest records of the Israelis all throughout the southeast and northwest of the United States and showed you the connections of where they were arrested and why and who they were living in close proximity to. Now, I'm going to share a video. These pictures, these diagrams are from the showing you the connections of where they live. Now, I'm going to make myself disappear so you can see the whole thing. Okay, this is Hollywood, Florida. Who is in Hollywood, Florida? Mohammed Atta, Ziad Jarrah, Marwan al-Shehhi, the Hamburg cell, the guys who flew the planes into the World Trade Center and into a field in Shanksville. And this didn't include Hani Hanjour, who allegedly flew Flight 77 into the Pentagon. Flight 77 did fly into the Pentagon, but was he the pilot? I don't know. I don't know. So, as you can see here, look here. Future hijacker in red, where they were living in Coral Springs, in Plantation, in Miramar, in Opelika, right? Israeli DA groups, the green. Now, he took the arrest records and he took the public records of the hijackers, which were public, and connected them. This is why Gerald Shea is a fucking legend. Does the 9/11 Truth Movement talk about this guy? No. Do they talk about this document? No. I wonder why. Because if you don't believe in hijackers, this doesn't exist. That's why. And that's why I consider these people stupid. Stop following Richard Gates. Stop following Barbara Honegger. Stop reading stupid shit from Craig McKee and, you know, all these CIT people and Jason Burmas and all these Alex Jones, Jim Fetzer, Oli Damgar, and all these other fucking idiots. Stop it. They don't know shit about 9/11. Anyway, look how close they are to each person. It's not a coincidence. Fuck you. It's not a coincidence. Look at all these coincidences. Future hijackers, Israeli DA groups in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, in Sunnydale, in Miami Beach, in Miami, in Virginia Gardens, in Opelika, in Miramar, in Plantation, in Coral Springs. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just in Hollywood, Florida. Okay? Here's a bigger map showing you where the Israeli DA groups were. Close proximity to all the future hijackers in Florida with Florida. This is too fucking close, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the green, there's the red. Not far at all. Hudson and Bergen counties. Okay? Future hijackers in red, Israeli DA groups in green. Look at how close they are to each other. Ladies and gentlemen, need I prove to you anything else? This is not a fucking coincidence anymore. Not a coincidence. This is covering from March to September of 2001, months in advance. Here's the United States. Israeli DA groups in green, FBI subjects and hijackers in red. FBI suspects meaning associates of the hijackers, which means it was a bigger cell. Look at the green, look at the red. I mean, what do you fucking need to show a much bigger conspiracy involving Israeli intelligence than what you heard from, say, the media, the legacy media, or even from the alleged 9/11 truth movement who don't know jack shit regarding this? I would say this is a much more compelling fucking conspiracy. Would you? Stop listening to Christopher Bowen. He don't know shit about this. Jack shit. Thank you, Gerald Shea. You're a freaking legend for compiling that data and giving it to the 9/11 Commission and the Joint House Inquiry, and they just dismissed it, right? Because now we're talking, right? But, really, big props for Tucker Carlson for talking about it. As brief as it was, it should have been gotten the attention instead of World Trade Center 7 or 1 and 2 about, this is a bigger conspiracy, way bigger, way fucking bigger. And nobody talks about it. I am. DJ Thermal Detonator is. Sean Russell is. We are. We're still around. Okay. We're still around. And we're on Barrel Media. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I got banned. So the DJ Thermal Detonator. Sean Russell's there though. You could always talk to us on Facebook, Messenger. We're willing to be receptive. 9/11 Truth Movement doesn't want anything to do with us. They hate us. They think we're government assets. Yeah, really, government assets. So even though I'm not with Tucker Carlson on most things at all, in this so far, in the 4 parts, I have really no criticisms. Even though, again, all this shit was known 22 years ago, including the Gerald Shea Memorandum.
Of Israelis traveling around the country as artists, sketching things, happened to be one time around.
And in the playlist I made, right, a lot of the unit commanders in charge of these units that were operating all throughout the Southeast and Northwest, some of these people you wouldn't think would be selling fucking art. Some of them were bomb ordnance experts. Some were battalion commanders in Lebanon. Some were strategic unit signals intelligence leaders. Who the fuck? What are they doing selling art? What fucking backgrounds are these guys? People like Pure Sigalovitz, Hanan Sarfati in Florida. All right? Just some of the names. Go to my playlist. I detail everything. I name names. Everything. Gerald Shea Memorandum. The most damning document in all of 9/11.
Cape Canaveral, I remember, and other places where there were certainly things to paint and sketch, but also noticeably near military installations or some other kind of installation in the government. So I think that's an open question yet.
The so-called Israeli art students centered their operations in Hollywood, Florida, and northern New Jersey. Those are the exact locations of the hijackers before the attack. According to the memorandum, quote, "It is very difficult to believe, based on the existing evidence and the location of their common central operating bases, that this group was not tracking the future hijackers and their collaborators as well." According to The Forward, a Jewish publication, quote, "The Israeli government acknowledged the operation and apologized for not coordinating it with Washington." Within a week of the attack, Israeli intelligence officials claimed they warned the United States about large-scale terror attacks on highly visible targets in the United States. But the specifics of those warnings have never been made public. There's no evidence they happened.
In fact, in the whole time I worked in counterterrorism from 92 till 2004, I never saw one piece of information from the Israelis that was really worth anything.
As Americans, we need Washington to create a new, truly independent commission, one that does not lie, and that instead investigates what happened on 9/11 and answers the questions we've posed in this episode. Who made the decision to ship the debris from the attacks out of this country immediately, and why? What was the role of the CIA office in Building 7? What signals intelligence did the NSA have in relation to the plot, and how much of it did they share with foreign governments? What did those foreign governments know and fail to tell the United States? The American public deserves answers immediately to those questions. These are all questions the 9/11 Commission itself ignored. Why did the FBI's most wanted poster for Osama bin Laden, updated in November of 2001, omit any mention of the 9/11 attacks?
Because for one, and this is not new, the FBI was still investigating 9/11 through the Pent Bomb investigation. They were still collecting data. Now, the operation wasn't planned by Osama bin Laden. They didn't know shit about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Why? Because the CIA never told the FBI about him either, until it was much too late, till he was captured, right? There was only a few people who were knowledgeable about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, including Frank Pellegrino from the FBI. And that he made that connection back in '93 regarding a wire transfer from Osama bin Laden to Mohammed Salame, one of the suspects involved with the '93 bombing. It was a $5,000 check Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had given to Mohammed Salame. People thought he was nuts. So who's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed? Nobody. Well, he turned out to be right. But bin Laden, the case was still building against him. Even though the media said, "Oh, he's responsible," he called for declarations of attack in the United States. That's not a secret. This is the reason why they connected him. But media didn't know anything about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Nothing. That's why they didn't mention it in the FBI poster, because they were still building the case against him.
Why did it take the government 5 years to release footage of the Pentagon? And why were there only 2 publicly available videos of the Pentagon crash? The Pentagon was one of the most heavily secured and surveilled buildings on planet Earth. And yet, even now, more than 20 years later, there are only 2 videos.
Because the videos on the western wall of the Pentagon were not working, because the Pentagon was undergoing what was called the Pentagon Renovation Project that started in the mid-'90s. And Wedge 1, which was the west wall here, was the final apparatus of the renovation of the Pentagon. And nothing was working. Now, coincidence? Could be. Intentional? Then that means that the hijackers knew about it. Doesn't make sense, right? Was the plane remotely guided with the hijackers on board the plane? I'm with that. I don't know if that's true, but that's a reasonable theory, which is the reason why they did the loop, because they were going to fly over the Pentagon. But that would mean that remote control said, "Oh, we're going to attack another area of the Pentagon," or the plane wasn't remotely controlled. I don't know, but I don't throw away that theory.
Why did U.S. forces abruptly bury Osama bin Laden at sea and never release any photograph of his body? How hard, by the way, would it be for amateur pilots with only basic aviation training and no experience flying jumbo jets to navigate to lower Manhattan and crash into a...
You don't need to be an expert to crash a plane. You don't need to be, they weren't training to be pilots. This is another thing that the 9/11 truth movement could never understand. These guys only had to learn how to take off. Steering the plane's like steering a car. It's easier, actually. And most of the time, it was on autopilot anyway. Now, again, not to say that at some point it was, the planes were remotely controlled without the hijackers even knowing. Could it be? Could be.
Building. The majority of hijackers were flagged for additional screening at the airport. How did they get on those watch lists? And why didn't security slow them down? Why wasn't there substantial wreckage of Flight 93 at its supposed crash site in Shankville, Pennsylvania?
Let's talk about that. Right? This is a huge division within the 9/11 truth movement, right? Regarding, that doesn't look like what a plane debris crash site would look like, right? Now, all this credit goes to DJ Thermodetonator. A couple of years ago, Jason Burbis threw out a challenge to anybody. Show me what a plane debris site at 93 looks like, any other site ever in history, and that he'll stop playing clips of Shanksville saying, "Oh, there's no plane crash there." Now, for years, I always thought like that. That didn't even look like shit. It didn't look like nothing crashed there. But when you realize that the majority of plane crashes, which are rare, by the way, the majority of them are the pilots who have malfunctioning plane, and they're dumping the fuel, and they're trying to land on their belly with the lowest speeds possible. This is the reason why you see large pieces of the plane, the hull, the wings, the engines, or, even whole bodies. You didn't see that with Shanksville or at Pentagon. You saw tiny bits of fucking debris. Wow, that didn't look like a plane crash. When was the last time you saw an intentional plane crash? Which is even extremely rare, right? Well, I'm going to show you a clip that was used. Now, me and DJ Domadenier took Jason Burma's challenge. I used German Wings 9525. DJ Domadenier used PSA 1771. Now, PSA 1771 is the better example of this because it crashed into an open field, and the plane was going 700, I think, like 20 miles an hour, breaking the sound barrier, which was far faster than Flight 93 was going. This happened in 1987. I don't know the date. I think it was like late winter, November or December of 1987. And so I'm going to share this video with you. And it was a clip of a documentary about Flight 1771. But this is the actual video of the field. Does that look like a plane crash to you? I don't see large pieces of the plane here. This is what it looked like for Flight 93, according to the eyewitness testimonies of people living in Somerset County that saw and heard the plane crash into the field. And this is what was left of it. Listen.
A passenger plane is obliterated in the California hills.
There were no wings, no fuselage. There was no tail section. There were no aircraft seats.
No.
Hardened steel is ripped to pieces.
This was the worst damage I've ever seen.
The wreckage paints a grim picture of the final moments of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771. The plane reached impossibly high speeds.
They tell us that it actually broke the sound barrier.
Passengers experienced crippling G-forces.
We assessed the impact forces around 5,000 Gs.
Just like Flight 93, motherfucker. That's all I need to show you. That's why you don't see large plane debris with Flight 93, because just like PSA 1771, it was intentionally crashing into the ground. Now, unlike PSA 1771, Flight 93 was fully fueled from the east, from Newark to Los Angeles International. I'm sorry, San Francisco, I think. So East Coast to West Coast, fully loaded. So nothing's going to survive. Now, paper can survive because Flight 93 was also carrying, I think, 200,000 pieces of mail. And they found debris, light debris. They found cards, how can passports survive? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Florida's driver's license of Jack Tallarico, or Talamandy, or something like that. I forgot his name, excuse me. John Talagnari. This is his ID card, his Florida driver's license. Looks in pretty good shape to me. United Airlines, Lorraine Bay, her ID card. Looks to be in pretty good shape. So, yes, paper objects can survive because as the plane is crashing downward, the imploding explosion is going to push everything out from the plane. Everything out with the explosion. The G-force was enormous. And that's why you don't see large plane debris at all from Flight 93 or at the Pentagon.
We were told the crash of that aircraft was so powerful that it vaporized the aircraft's hull, and yet the hijackers' passports were found intact at the site. How does that work? And who was being protected by the Commission's unwillingness to answer these questions? Someone was. None of these questions were even asked by the 9/11 Commission. It's time that someone asked them and that the government answers them. On September 11, 2001, nearly 3,000 people were murdered. In the years that followed, hundreds of thousands more perished as a result of our response to those attacks. The government enacted measures that suspended constitutional protections. The freedoms this country was created to protect, they're gone now. The government employed illegal warfare tactics, including torture and the murder of innocent individuals. Those attacks fundamentally altered the way America operates, the way all of us live here.
Right.
And yet not everyone suffered in the aftermath of 9/11. Some emerged the winners. Reveal who profited from 9/11 in the
True. That's the end of the series, of part 4. There's another ending in part 5. And I didn't get to the part, I think I skipped over it when I had to skip over a certain part of the commercial. Now, he talked about World Trade Center 7. How did the FDNY, how did the police department know that it was going to collapse? How did the BBC know? And he plays that clip about Jane Stanley, and behind her is the Solomon Brothers building, World Trade Center 7, was still standing because Jane Stanley wasn't in New York. She's getting reports from the ground in New York to her office in the BBC and telling her that the building is going to collapse. So she reported earnestly, not knowing that the building was still standing behind her. But they were getting reports from the FDNY, from the NYPD about a collapse. Well, how the fuck did the fire department know? Well, I'm glad you asked. Anyway, here's what Jane Stanley had to say years later, because she was inundated that the BBC was in on it. Here's her response.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost...
But Tower 7 hadn't collapsed.
Where did CNN and BBC get their information?
Who's changed?
Especially considering the building was still standing directly behind their reporters.
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of what was an incredibly chaotic day. The investigations we've carried out suggest we were working on the basis of an incorrect news agency report. We had this statement from Reuters. What it says is, on September the 11th, 2001, Reuters incorrectly reported that one of the buildings at the New York World Trade Center, 7 WTC, had collapsed before it actually did. Do you think that's suspicious?
Not really. I didn't even really, to be honest with you, I didn't even want to put that line in.
There you go.
I'm not the only person on the team. I do think it's a little...
You can't make sure. And this is the reason why Dylan never brings up loose change anymore. Neither does Jason Berman. Right? They know they fucked up a lot of shit up. Pentagon, Shankville, I mean, it's one of the worst films regarding 9/11, but it's the most popular by far. And a lot of people, believed a lot of the shit that was. I was one. I was one of those people. Not for long, but I was one. And this is the reason why, myself, DJ Dover Detonator, and others, we open up our own channels to try and educate the public about 9/11.
Embarrassing on both the part of CNN and BBC.
What of the reporter herself? She's never talked about this before. Jane Stanley was a world affairs specialist and had just arrived in New York. The BBC quickly found a place to interview her, but she had precious little information to go on.
I was thrown, not a question, but a statement of fact. I don't know where that came from.
Jane, what more can you tell us about its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. I mean, it's very, very difficult being in that position where you've got no communications, no access to information, and that just comes out of left field. Details are very, very sketchy. It was very upsetting about a year ago because of the level of persecution and the virulence in which I was spoken about. And it's just very unfortunate that this whole conspiracy, kind of, I think, rather ridiculous situation has grown out of what's really a very small and very honest mistake.
Yeah. And guess what? Those reports were coming from the fire chiefs themselves. And I'm going to read you to them. I'm going to read you the reports of the fire chiefs who testified at the Aegis versus Con Ed case. Okay, remember Daniel Negro? I brought him up. Here we go. All right. Listen to what it says here. Was it during the meeting that you decided that a collapse zone would be established around World Trade Center 7? Yes. Do you recall whether there was one overriding factor that caused you to decide to establish the collapse zone around World Trade Center 7? I think it was more the three-headed reason. The absence of people in the building, the fires, and the damage. I don't know if anyone would have been enough to make the decision, right? After convening the 2 p.m. meeting, making the conclusion about establishing the collapse zone, 2 o'clock, around World Trade Center 7, what did you do next? Well, I recall that we went back to the operations post to tell everyone that what we were doing, to get all the chief officers that we could get there to, and people from the other agencies who had people committed to the area, like the police department, Port Authority. Here's Chief Hayden, Peter Hayden. And this is what he had to say. What I saw was what I viewed to be a bulge in the southwest corner, somewhere between 7th and 12th floors, heavy fire conditions on several floors, right? And he says, could you tell whether the bulge extended past the corner of either south or west? And he says, well, we made the observation. Did you observe damage to the southwest building? Well, a bulge in the corner of the building would be described as damage, in my view. Did that result in the creation of a collapse around World Trade Center 7? Yes. Did you know when that was created? I think shortly after we discussed the structural stability of the building and other discussions we had subsequent to that, we decided to establish a collapse zone. What were the discussions around the structural stability of the building? Well, what we were worried about is collapse at some point in time. We had a discussion with a gentleman who identified himself as an engineer. Posted to him the question that, considering the structural damage, right, that was obvious to the building on the southwest corner and the amount of fire damage that was occurring within the building, could we anticipate a collapse of the building? What if collapse, and if so, when? He said yes. And he gave an approximate time of about 5 to 6 hours, which was pretty much right on the money because the building collapsed around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. After the discussion, the transit was set up, and of course, the collapse zones were established. 2 fire chiefs on record. Okay, so there you have it. 2 fucking fire chiefs on record. I have so much more. As you can see, there's a whole playlist, whole things right there. All right. Because I think I skipped over that part because Chuck Carlson was going to the commercial. I didn't want to bore you with that. But I just wanted to bring that up too. Oh, okay. Listen, we have one more part and then we're finished and that's it. And listen, guys, really, thanks a lot for tuning in. And I'll see you in the next video, everybody.